DC is about to blow away the comic book world this week, so let's dive in and see what's coming up. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Preview Picks, and we're going to be going over the books that are coming out on Wednesday, as well as talking about whether there's something you need to pick up at your shop or not. To start off with, we're going to talk about independent titles, and we have Black Science number 40, written by Rick Remender, which is going to be continuing on one of his longest-running series outside of Deadly Class and occasionally Low. However, I've spoken about this before, a lot of his series take small hiatuses so that way his artists can work on getting the story up and running because, well, he's working on a lot of books at a bunch of different times. So with the new advent of the Deadly Class television show and a number of other things, it's nice to see Black Science back on the roster, but it's usually only good for about a few months. Also from Image, we're going to get Ascender, which is written by Jeff Lemire, and it's got art by Dustin Nguyen, and this is a continuation of his Descender storyline, which was one of my favorites over the last few years. So this is taking place in a year well beyond when we actually last left the story. It seems like some of the main characters are still interacting, and, well, there's a lot of other stuff that's going on as well, so I'm always going to recommend it. However, instead of being geared around technology and artificial intelligence like Tim 21 was inside Descender, this is more about worlds of magic that have come to power after the decline of technology. So it's one that I think you guys should check out. From Dynamite, we get Peter Cannon Thunderbolt number 5, which is Kieran Gillen's real deconstruction of comic books as a whole and what's evolved since Watchmen. So while it started off kind of as an homage as well as a takedown of Watchmen as a storyline, all the evolutions of comic books that came after it have found their own independent place, whether it's the ultra-violence of a Mark Millar kind of era or possibly the resurgence or the emergence of independent comics. He's putting a little different commentary and a little different spin on every single issue, and it's really interesting to see what Kieran Gillen can really do with the subject matter. And Casper Wingegaard, the artist, he's doing a fantastic job on it as well. It's not necessarily what I was expecting, but man, what I found was even more than what I thought it was going to be. Then to finish things off in indies, we've got Archie Comics, which has Blossom 666 number 4, which is about Cheryl Blossom, her brother, and a bunch of other different foreign relatives that are kind of trying to become the next Antichrist. Written by Cullen Bunn, it's a great fit to the actual Archie Horror series, which is going to include things like Jughead the Hunger, as well as Vampironica, and a number of other different ones that are going along with the overall storyline. Archie Horror is probably one of the best incarnations of Archie in recent history, so if you pick up any of these titles, I think you're going to have a good time, especially if you've got some sort of nostalgia for these old characters. Seeing them in these new situations really geared around horror is always fun. Then we actually have some pretty important reprints that are coming out. Amazing Spider-Man number 252, which is the original appearance of the Black Suit issue. I do have the original kicking around here somewhere in my collection. I'm lying, I actually know exactly where it is. But it's possibly the best opportunity for a lot of people to own Amazing Spider-Man 252, whether it's the original or a reprint, and always fun to go back to these remastered versions of these stories so that way you get a better, higher quality version of that story than, say, trying to track down a book that's nearly 40 years old at this point in time. Also for reprints, we get Incredible Hulk number 181, which is the debut of Wolverine. And again, given the prices that these things are trading at, $1,800 for books that are in excellent condition, the likelihood of you actually owning one, unless you hit the lottery, is pretty slim. So picking up one of the facsimile editions, even though it's $3.99, is a great way to get that original story in a little bit more prestigious, better quality format than what you would have picked up in the past. I'm always a fan of picking these up. I've got Fantastic Four number 1 in the exact same manner, so I'm probably going to grab these two as well. Then on to current running comics, we've got Detective Comics Annual number 2, which is going to be Peter J. Tomasi's take on the Detective Comics Annual, and overall, it's just a bit more of an accessory storyline. Hopefully it's going to enhance the experience that we're getting in the current Detective Comics, but there are usually multiple stories written by different people that are going to be kind of going through the entire series, so it might not necessarily have as much of an impact on the Detective Comics storyline as a regular standalone issue. Also, we get Catwoman number 1, or Catwoman Annual number 1, and the big thing that I've seen about the Catwoman storyline is that it's no longer really majorly contributed to by Geoff Johns, who actually started this up. So while her art was one of my favorite things, and I thought that she was really emerging as a storyteller, it seems like she's kind of handed over creative reins to other individuals, and hopefully she's going to get them back at some point in time. I'm not necessarily sure what happened behind the scenes, but that was one of my favorite parts of the Catwoman storyline. And with Tom King coming out with his Batman Catwoman story that's going to be taking place inside 2020, more on that in another video, it's going to be a bit less prominent as far as me inside my pull list. I might actually have to take it off if it's not carrying along the kind of storyline quality that I was hoping for, or at least the stylistic art that I really got from Geoff Johns. Over at Marvel, we get Magnificent Miss Marvel #3, written by Saladin Ahmed, and this continues a kind of evolutionary story where we see a bit more street-level Kamala Khan getting opened and exposed to a variety of different cosmic situations. So it might not necessarily be my favorite storyline as far as driving the character forward. It is a relatively cool take that I'm going to give a little bit more time to. Miss Marvel is pretty far down on my pull list, so it's kind of optional this week, but if you guys are a fan of the character who is possibly going to make it into the next generation of Marvel MCU movies, well, it might be a good place to kind of get your feet wet with the character, especially given a new writer who's going to give her a new voice. I'm not necessarily going to consistently be picking it up, but for you fans, well, it's your stop to shop. A book I am going to be picking up is Fantastic Four #10, even though it's a War of the Realms tie-in. Based on the cover and the insinuation of the storyline written by Dan Slott, we're going to be getting a lot more of Sue Storm, Valeria, and Franklin. So this is going to be a War of the Realms tie-in, but we're going to get a bit more of the accessory family, not necessarily Ben Grimm's Thing or Reed Richards' Mr. Fantastic. I'm really excited because one of the best parts of the Hickman run was the evolution of those child characters over the entirety, so I'm excited to see where we can kind of go, and given the recent Doom storyline where the kids really kind of came out swinging towards the end of it, I want to see where that evolves. And speaking of evolution, we've got Amazing Spider-Man #22, which continues to evolve and end the Hunted storyline. So we finally get the point where the Lizard is out there rampaging, he's brainless and all that, and then you've got Spider-Man who's finally ready to take on Kraven the Hunter, the original Kraven the Hunter, not necessarily clone Kraven, and we're reaching the conclusion or the finale of Nick Spencer's Hunted storyline, which a lot of us are probably pretty excited for, even though it has been a very interesting ride, taking all these villains, putting them into the crock pot, letting them stew and seeing what comes out on top. We're not necessarily going to be getting, well, the most sophisticated story, or we might. We don't necessarily know at this point in time. There are still some cards that have yet to be played by Nick Spencer as well as the creative team, so I'm excited to see where this one goes and how it redirects for the future of the character. There's also going to be quite the future with Thor, which we get Thor #13, which continues to tie into War of the Realms, but this is getting close to the conclusion of Jason Aaron's run on the character, which has been going on for more than 5 years. So he has been writing Thor for this specific moment and where he's going to be going in the future, so it's exciting to see how the War of the Realms is going to impact the character and move him into that old man Thor kind of story arc, where it can either be, well, derailed by another new writer, or it can kind of continue and evolve with a few more twists and turns. We already know that Jason Aaron's going to be stepping down after a short period of time once he concludes this storyline, and he's going to dive into Valkyrie and a lot of other stuff, but I'm excited to see how he wraps this up and puts a bow on it for the next person that's going to take over the Asgardian. So I'm excited to see where Thor goes, and it's one of the must-buy books which you're talking about War of the Realms outside of the main arc issue. Speaking of finales and books that are coming to a close, Heroes in Crisis #9 is going to give us the conclusion where we actually see what happens to Wally West and how he goes around fixing things that he fucked up and then possibly killing himself in the end. Isn't that so exciting and not depressing at all? So Heroes in Crisis has been kind of a, well, it's really split some of the communities right down the middle, because a lot of people are either really big fans of this because they're big fans of Tom King as a writer and they have faith that he's going to be telling a good story. Others are taking the story at where it currently is and are just like, man, this kind of sucks. And there's a lot of fill that goes into these individual storylines, these individual issues, and you could probably break down the core mechanics of the actual story into about half the space. But then you'd be denying yourself Clay Mann's great art as well as the contributions of Mitch Gerrard, so I'm not so sure about this. I do think that it's going to read considerably better in trade, where you have the opportunity to speed through sections if you want to, as well as slow down and appreciate different aspects as well. So I'm going to kind of hold off and then do an entire review on the entire series so that way we get a better idea of what's going on in one continuous motion, because that's the way I think it really needs to be appreciated. There is another book that you need to be appreciating, and that is Daredevil #6. Chip Zdarsky and his artistic contributors have been telling a fantastic story, primarily Marco Cicchetto, for the beginning of this series, but now we're getting to a bunch of different aspects that are associated with Daredevil, as well as the introduction of a new Daredevil character in the future. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be somebody other than Matt, but if it is, I mean, we're taking things in a very different light, and the kind of focus on the Catholic guilt aspect, tying up Matt Murdock's personality, and then really moving the character forward is what Daredevil really needs. And based on some of the commentary that we've heard from other different contributors that were at the Marvel Summit when Zdarsky pitched it, this is just the beginning of where things are going to be going. I've got a lot of faith in Chip Zdarsky as well as what he's doing with Daredevil, specifically because he hasn't really disappointed me with many stories up to this point in time. So I'm going to give him all the room that he needs to tell the story. Hopefully, he's going to continue to tell something super strong. Another super strong story, though, is Immortal Hulk, which gets issue number 18. And the most important thing, not necessarily the fact that 18 is going to continue the whole Joe Fixit storyline. We saw this Gamma explosion that's going to be bringing out this whole variety, and we're going to get Abomination inside this issue. That's huge. That's amazing. But Immortal Hulk is actually going to get 9 different reprints this week, ranging all the way back to issue number 1, which was released more than a year ago. So this is unprecedented, the fact that this story continues to get so much momentum when it comes to an Incredible Hulk story. It's just mind-boggling that it can outsell something like Batman. It's just super cool. And the fact that we continue to get re-releases and reprints, that means that even more people are going to be getting into the series, which I am really excited about because the Immortal Hulk happens to be one of the best comics that's coming out of Marvel right now. So if you haven't been picking it up, pick it up right now. I'm going to put a link in the description for the first trade so that way you don't necessarily have to try and hunt down reprints or original printings. I don't know if I can get more excited though, because this week Doomsday Clock number 10 comes out, which has been teasing JSA as well as the answers to everything that's behind Doomsday Clock for ages. So we've seen Dr. Manhattan go completely ham on the rest of the heroes inside the DC universe. What is going on? When is Superman going to arrive? There's a whole bunch of different stuff that is associated with this particular story that we need to get answers for, and hopefully we're going to get them as soon as possible, aka on Wednesday. So we're going to dive into that and see what they've got in store for us, because it is the most delayed comic book outside of, I don't know, Dark Knight 3 that just recently happened. So I'm just excited to see how they execute with this. Take the time for the good story, because ultimately, if it's really great, I'll just grab it super hardcover edition like I have Watchmen right on the shelf. So I'm excited to see where this one goes, and hopefully it can continue to tell a solid story, and it hasn't been kicked in the nuts so much. I mean, the worry is that DC is seeing a completely different publishing direction based on the departure of Geoff Johns as this kind of creative director, and they're going to kind of move in a different direction, which makes Doomsday Clock completely, well, irrelevant. And I don't want to see that happen, because so far it's been one of the best parts of DC when it's been coming out. But now on to new stuff. We get Superman Leviathan Rising Special number 1, which is, well, it's telling the story of Leviathan Rising. It's also going to sow the seeds for Greg Rucka's new Lois Lane series, as well as Matt Fraction's Superman's best pal, Jimmy Olsen, which is going to be from Fraction and Steve Lieber. So because this is a Brian Michael Bendis-driven event, I am inherently seemingly biased because I don't appreciate the other work that he's been doing on Action Comics and Superman, and I don't necessarily think that it's going to move the character forward in the way that I want. However, I am excited to see what Greg Rucka can do with Lois Lane, as well as what Matt Fraction can do with Jimmy Olsen. Give him kind of a super secret agent vibe, while he's being a mild-mannered reporter, a very different kind of character. I'm excited to see what these takes are, and if this brings me a better book for Lois Lane than what Brian Michael Bendis is writing, as well as a really cool Jimmy Olsen story, I'm probably going to be more behind it. So that's the only real reason for me to pick it up, to see what kind of seeds we sow for these characters and whether they're going to move forward in a meaningful way inside the future. Then to finish things off at DC, they've got another really huge book that's coming out this week, which is Batman: The Last Night on Earth, which sees Scott Snyder reuniting with Greg Capullo to tell their last Batman story. And this is going to be Batman in the far-flung future, where he's got a head of the Joker inside a bottle that continues to talk to him, and he's running around in what he thought was a straitjacket, or at least that's what Alfred presented to him in a few of the previews. There's a lot of stuff that's going on and a lot to unpack, but be sure that Batman: The Last Night on Earth, number 1, is a book that you can't miss this week, simply because it's reuniting one of the best teams on Batman in recent memory and the real architects of Batman inside the New 52. I'm excited to see where it goes, and you guys should be too, but I want to know what you guys think in the comments, so hit me up down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books and more.